Hello and welcome to this video on post-race recovery. This is a complete post-ultra trail recovery roadmap with explanations for those who want to understand the why behind what we do. I'm Tim Piggott from HB3, and in this video I'll talk you through all the key components you need to consider for recovery post-ultramarathon. So let's get into it. Recovery from an ultra is not simply dealing with tired legs. It's a multi-tissue, multi-system stress, and every system has its own clock. So the same afternoon nap will not fix them all. So this is the lens for everything that follows, and I want you to hold on to this idea. So we want to think about our different tissues and their timelines. So post-loading, cartilage recovers within up to 30 minutes after running. So by the time you got your trainers off, it's starting that recovery process. Bone is 90% restored within 8 hours, and tendons need 48 hours after a big stretch shortening cycle volume, so a long run. And critically, if you reload them inside that 24 hours, you actually lose collagen. The concentric muscle work, so the shortening muscle work, that can take 24 to 48 hours, so that's the kind of running uphills. But the eccentric loading, and that's what dominates after a downhill ultra, that's 48 to 72 hours plus. And the creatine kinase and myoglobin can stay elevated for up to a week. The central nervous system is maybe 72 hours minimum, and the aerobic system itself is the fastest. It recovers in under 24 hours. And this comes from Gabellinotta's 2024 sports medicine paper, which is a really useful paper to read to understand the different tissue response times. And the practical implications are that at any given training session, you're optimally loading one tissue whilst perhaps suboptimally loading another, and we therefore need to plan accordingly. Don't expect recovery to mean the same thing for a tendon as it is for the cardiovascular system. So to put a number on it, our resting creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage, is maybe between 34 and 171 units. After a marathon, you're around 1,000. After a long ultra, so maybe 100 miles, 100 kilometers, mountain running, that creatine kinase can exceed 10,000 units. And that's coming from Tiller and Millett's paper in 2024. So what this tells us is recovery from an ultra is largely a tissue loading problem, not simply a metabolic one. And this is where the S&C can come in, not as a competing demand for recovery, but also as a tool for delivering the right load to the right tissue at the right time to promote that recovery. So when we're thinking about trail running, there are three things that make ultras hit harder than maybe the same time spent on the road, and they compound, and each one is then addressable. The first is the eccentric loading, the downhill running, and this activates type 3 and type 4 afferent fibres. So that's the in-race fatigue limiter for longer distance races. Post-race, that central drive from the brain is the limiter on our ability to then exert maximum strength again. Second is the duration, so the time on feet outpaces the glycogen reserves and the gut tolerance. And GI distress affects 30 to 90% of ultra runners, depending on what you read, and is often the leading cause of a DNF. Third, we've got sleep deprivation. So if we're doing multi-day events, which are going to disrupt our slow wave sleep and the lymphatic clearance, that's going to amplify pain and impair decision making, and each of these compounds. And even if you're not doing a multi-day event, the chances are you've had sleep disruption the night before the event and then night afterwards as well. So we think about these four systems, not one. And recovery happens in these four different places at once: the muscular, the immune, the gastrointestinal, and the nervous. And they talk to each other, and critically, they can fail together. So here's what's actually breaking down in each system. With the muscular system, we've got micro tears, depleted phosphocreatine, a deficit in muscle protein synthesis. So repair is therefore via 1.6 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram per day, with around 2.5 grams of leucine per meal, and maybe then 5 grams of creatine per day as well. If there's been more eccentric damage, this extends the timeline for up to 8 days. And that's the one that often surprises people, as your muscles can feel better sooner than that. The immune and GI system working together, they share that same machinery. So stress and damage to the gut can leave a window open, known as leaky gut, which leads to endotoxin translocation. So probiotics and glutamine can support the barrier function to repair. Curcumin attenuates systemic inflammation, and vitamin D can support our innate immunity. With the nervous system, sleep, mood, central drive, autonomic balance are all impacted. Slow wave sleep does the glymphatic clearance that we want. Magnesium can support GABA, and vagal tone drives the parasympathetic recovery. And mood will then follow after actively working on these components, and that's an important point we're going to return to later in this presentation. So this contrast matters because most published recovery research is about marathons, but you're racing ultras, and they're not the same problem, just at scale. So marathon recovery is mostly muscle and glycogen. It's fairly straightforward. GI distress is uncommon. Sleep is often preserved. Inflammation peaks at that 24 to 48 hours and then resolves. So most athletes are back to easy running in maybe 5 to 7 days. Ultras are different. The muscle damage is 5 to 10 times larger, and that creatine kinase stays elevated for days. GI distress hits a majority of runners in some way, shape or form, and sleep deprivation is itself a fatigue driver. So the immune and the inflammatory shift extends a week or two, and mood and motivation lag well beyond physical recovery. So when you read marathon recovery research, you need to mentally double or triple the timelines for an ultra context. So this is a key one, the sort of gut-brain and immune keystone link. So if you only intervene in one place, this is where I'd get you to intervene. So the gut-brain immune axis influences 3 of the 4 systems disproportionately. With the gut, we can consider taking probiotics, so lactobacillus, bifidobacterium strains, and you can be taking these for 4 to even 12 weeks. And this is going to reduce the intestinal permeability and respiratory infection rates. Plus glutamine, sort of 5 to 10 grams a day, is going to help repair the gut lining. For supporting the immune system, there was the paper by Wyatt in 2024 that found that vitamin D of around about 1,000 IU twice daily for 3 weeks before a race can significantly reduce post-race troponin, myoglobin, creatine kinase and TNF-alpha. So with the brain, the tryptophan kynurenine pathway shifts post-race. Trained athletes show often 63% more kynuric acid, and that's a neuroprotective mechanism. So mood after a race is biological output, it's not just a personality trait. So if you are feeling low after a race, you get those post-race blues, understand there is a biological driver for that. And we're going to come back to this again. Okay, so this is maybe the operational meat of the webinar. The sort of first 7 days are programmable, and this is exactly what we want you to do and when. And this is the protocol that you're going to refer to most, and the one that we hand out as a worksheet, so refer to the attached PDF as well. So phase 1, this is your first 2 hours, and this decides really how the next 7 days are going to go. And the single thing you really want to remember is drink, get some salts back on board, and get some sugar on board. Specifically, you might be thinking about 1.2 to 1.5 litres of fluid per kilogram of body mass lost. and add about 500 milligrams of sodium per litre. So that's about 1 gram per kilogram of carbohydrate within 30 minutes of crossing the line as well, plus 0.3 grams per kilogram of protein with that carbohydrate, because the two together improve the uptake. So that might think about being a recovery smoothie. So if you've got access to it, you could be doing something like 250 mils of tart cherry juice for the extra vitamin C, maybe a banana, 25 grams of whey protein, tablespoon of flax seeds for some extra fibre, 500 milligrams of L-glutamine. But if that's not practical, just a simple 300 mils of chocolate milk plus maybe a 20 to 30 gram protein bar is equally evidence-based. Key point is just don't wait. The window matters. Get that on board as quickly as possible. Phase 2 is that first 24 hours post-race. And the thing to remember here is just try and eat every 3 hours, not waking up throughout the night though. So the total carbohydrate we're looking for is maybe 7 to 10 grams per kilogram per day, and that's spread across our meals. So protein 20 to 30 grams every 3 to 4 hours, aiming for around 5 grams of leucine per meal, and that's the sort of activation threshold. If you're looking for using supplements as well, then glutamine, maybe 5 grams in the morning, 5 grams in the evening. Probiotic and bovine colostrum can also help if you have them. And curcumin, so 1,000 milligrams with some black pepper to increase absorption. Magnesium, 300 to 400 milligrams before bed can also help. But of course, critically, sleep is the priority, and no real structured training. Walking is plenty enough. Phase 3, so this is our 24 to 72 hours. And the thing to remember here is just try and get to bed early, get a bit of extra sleep extension. From a protein perspective, trying to keep that 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram per day evenly distributed across all your meals. Get some pre-sleep protein, maybe 20 to 30 grams of casein or another slow digesting source, and this increases overnight muscle protein synthesis significantly. We might want to keep that creatine going at 5 grams a day, sort of post-breakfast. And you may want to think about some branched chain amino acids, sort of 5 grams in mid-morning and mid-afternoon if you're feeling particularly sore. But movement matters most. Walking, easy bike, swim, light mobility. We might start introducing our isometric loading if you're now pain free, but no high stretch shortening cycle work yet. So that's too soon inside this tendon refractory window that we talked about. So now moving on to phase 4. So this is our days 3 to 7. The thing to remember is keep moving lightly. Maybe keeping the anti-inflammatories up with curcumin, so the 1,000 milligrams, and keep that going for that sort of 5 to 7 days total. You might want to keep the tart cherry juice going, so 250 millilitres daily. That's going to help with your sleep and also soreness. And there's good evidence for both effects. But daylight and walking, these are the underrated tools for helping your mood. And don't underestimate them. So connect with people, not just screens. Social rest matters in this window. Training, easy aerobic, maybe just zone 1, maybe pushing to zone 2, but certainly no intervals, no hills. And start the reflection process that we'll talk about in a bit, whilst the race is still fresh in your mind. Now, if you don't want to manage all this yourself, or you're a coach and you want a periodized structure that you can drop in for your athletes, we've got 2 products on Training Peaks. We've got a 6-week post-ultramarathon recovery block for committed athletes coming back from a major race. And there's a 4-week version for shorter ultras or athletes who don't need a full reset. And both come in both heart rate driven or bike power versions. There's also our recovery and nutrition protocols on the website using our 4-system framework, and that's downloadable for a race agnostic resource that you can all access on hp-3.co.uk. Okay, so this is the reframe that maybe catches most runners off guard, is that loading is part of the treatment, part of the recovery. Simply just doing some stretching won't fix the tendons, but loading them correctly will. So the three reasons why structured loading is part of the recovery is each maps to a different system and they all compound. So at a tissue level, the low volume, low intensity movement preserves IGF-1 and BDNF signaling. It blunts protein degradation and limits the 0.5% per day atrophy rate and also protects our mood and sleep. It can help with pain. Even a single bout of moderate exercise produces hyperalgesia, so a real short-lived analgesic effect via descending neural pathways. Regular activity shifts you towards an anti-nociceptive phenotype, so somebody doesn't feel pain as much. So you build a fitness, and Zanini's 2025 randomized controlled trial showed that twice weekly lower limb strength plus plyometrics improves your running economy and durability and increases your time to exhaustion. So this is why we've been including S&C all the way through, and that's the difference between bonking at 30 kilometers and finishing strong. So you've hopefully put the work into the gym. We don't want you to now lose that. So the tendon biology that we need to think about, it comes from Wang's 2012 review of tendon mechanobiology, which shows that the signaling responds bidirectionally to the strain magnitude. So what that means is at just 4% strain, we've got that anabolic window where you build the tendon. The type 1 collagen synthesis goes up. The COX-2 and PG1, those inflammatory mediators, go down. And the tendon stem cells differentiate into tenocytes. So that anabolic effect persists even when there's a cytokine challenge from loading. But at 8% strain, the catabolic window, you then start to break that tendon. The COX-2 and MMP1, PG2, leukotrienes all rise, and those stem cells differentiate into adipocytes and osteocytes. And that's the cellular substrate of degenerative tendinopathy. So the practical takeaway is use isometrics days 3 to 7, and those are easy low-level isometrics. Then we can introduce heavy slow resistance from maybe week 2. But we need to respect that 48-hour tendon refractory window and don't do too much too close together. So again, this is maybe a useful single number in the strength training recovery literature from Pereja Blanco 2020 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So when you are training, if you are training to failure, you have a 48 hours of recovery cost. Therefore, train at maybe more like 50% of your possible reps. So you always walk out the gym thinking you could have done more. And that's what they call the non-failure training. And you get maybe roughly 20% velocity loss in the squat. Then recovery is about 6 hours. So the same load can be achieved, but dramatically different recovery costs. So when we think about recovery post-race, we can use that velocity-based monitoring, maybe a counter-movement jump height, as a daily readiness gate. So non-failure sets at moderate to heavy load is going to build our strength and durability without paying that 48-hour debt. Most ultra runners risk overtraining and over-fatiguing in the gym, and this is how you maybe stop doing that, monitoring that counter-movement jump. So here's a day-by-day S&C protocol. So race day, just after the race, you're only going to be doing little bit of light walking only. Days 1 to 2, again, walking, easy bike, maybe swimming 20 to 30 minutes, doing some general mobility. If you're now pain-free, you can start doing some isometrics. The goal is movement, not training. We call it motion is lotion. Days 3 to 4, then we want to start stimulating the tendon and muscle reactivity. So we might do some isometric loading, some non-failure lifts, and about 50% of your 1 rep max. But testing that with our counter movement jump as your readiness gate. Days 5 to 7, we are reintroducing some moderate load with some heavy slow resistance, still non-failure, with some also low volume mobility, maybe just zone 2 aerobic. Week 2, this is where our concurrent training resumes. So our twice weekly lower limb strength plus plyometrics, resistance training before our endurance training when on the same day, and at least 3 hours apart between those modalities if we can. And then after week 3, this is where we're rebuilding, so we're progressing the load, revisiting that sort of failure proximity once our creatine kinase and counter movement jump have normalized. So that's the entire sort of post-race S&C protocol that we follow. So this is the one that most ultra runners get wrong. Inflammation is signal, not noise. And if you're suppressing it routinely, and you blunt the very thing your body is trying to do. So you've got 2 decisions to make, driven by where you are in the training year. If it's in an adaptation block, so we're building towards an A race later in the year, we're looking to build maybe hypertrophy, tendon remodeling, that base building phase, we want to leave that inflammation alone. It's part of the signalling that will then make you stronger. So we need to avoid routine cold water immersion. Definitely avoid using non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, things like ibuprofen, because they're associated with worse long-term pain outcomes. We look at the studies in large cohorts. Sleep really is the highest leverage for general anti-inflammatory that you have. So allow the inflammatory signals to drive the remodeling that we're looking for. In race recovery, when you've done the damage and you definitely want that resolution, there are targeted aids. So vitamin D that we talked about, taking that for maybe 3 weeks pre-race and then post-race as well. Pre-race creatine loading, probiotics over those sort of 4 to 12 weeks pre-race. You might want to use cold water immersion, but it's only really justified in a congested race schedule. So that might be multi-day racing, stage racing, or where you've got another race coming up very quickly and you want to try and recover. The point is, inflammation isn't a single thing, and don't just treat it like a signal that you might want to amplify or just switch off. It's not just a problem you want to switch off and suppress. It may be useful to improve your fitness long term. So movement really is one of the most powerful analgesics that you have. As I said before, we call it motion is lotion. And there really are 2 parallel mechanisms here. So in the acute phase, we've got the exercise-induced hyperalgesia. So even one bout of moderate exercise is going to produce this. And the effects, it's only going to last minutes, but it's enough to permit some graded exposure. It engaged our descending pathways from the periaquetal grey and the rostral ventromedial medulla in the brain. And it gives us real measurable neurobiological effects. On a chronic level, and this is the bigger point, regular activity builds anti-nociceptive phenotypes, so people who are better conditioned to pain modulation. You've got stronger opioidogenic and neurogenic descending tone. Our sedentary behaviour would reverse this, more facilitation, less inhibition. So if you're watching this and you're already a regular exerciser, which I hope you are, but the point is, keep it going. Don't stop, or your pain levels might be higher than they need to be. And it's the same as what we tell our injured runners. Keep moving, just maybe not the intensity that put you there in the first place with whatever injury that you've got. This one is a little newer in the ultra literature, but it is worth knowing. So the vagus nerve has an anti-inflammatory function via the collagenic anti-inflammatory pathway. And the vagal efferents release acetylcholine that activates our alpha-7 nicotinic receptors on the macrophages. And this can suppress our TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta and IL-6. So Soltani's 2023 systematic review shows transcutaneous auricular vagus nerve stimulation can increase that RMSSD, which is a measure of our parasympathetic tone. And that was in 75% of studies, so a decent number. and the LF-HF ratio drops from 2.75 in sham to 1.72 in active stimulation. So that's a real autonomic shift. So practical for ultra athletes is maybe using ear-based devices, and that can be useful. Just doing 20 minutes a day. I use the NeuroSim device, and that's shown that mood will improve around 9.6% post-stimulation. So it's a useful adjunct in those sort of deload weeks and post-race. It won't replace sleep, but it does stack well. If you don't want to use one of these devices, then even things like humming and singing will also stimulate that vagus nerve, which can have a similar effect. So this is one that other recovery plans maybe miss entirely. You can't lie your way down out of mental, sensory and emotional fatigue. Recovery is more than just sleep. And this framework sits underneath everything that HP3 does. Most athletes only do maybe the first one and wonder why they still feel tired. So physical rest, we talk about sleep, our walks, mobility, maybe get a massage. This is the default, but we rarely do enough of it. Mental rest though, disengage. The mind needs disengagement separately from the body. So short daily breaks, meditation, maybe a notebook by the bed for writing down your racing thoughts. Sensory rest, less screen time, less noise, more dark. Modern stimulation overloads the nervous system, we know this. So midday eye closures, evening electronic shutdown, gadget-free walks. We also want creative rest, time in nature, art, music, which is particularly important for people like problem solvers. We use Shinrin Yoko, the sort of Japanese forest bathing, all of this counts. Then there's the other three, the ones that most athletes skip and the ones that compound the most. We need emotional rest. Have honest conversations with those people that you trust, especially relevant in the caring professions after a hard race, because you're often giving a lot of yourself already. Spiritual rest, so connect to something bigger than the race, belonging and purpose, so community, that might be prayer, meditation or general service. We also need social rest, time with the people who don't want anything from you. The kind of social time that recharges, not the kind that drains you. Most athletes know which is which, but few protect it. So when you're ready to start training again, but you're still feeling maybe a little fatigued, we want to know what type of fatigue that is. And if you can name what kind of fatigue you're carrying, you can then choose what to do about it. These are the three patterns that we consider. Are you just feeling flat? That flatness, that loss of speed and responsiveness, maybe comes from too much volume at too low intensity. You've got very good at plodding. So the solution is incorporating some plyometrics and some sprints, reduce the overall volume, and that will allow you to restore the power back. Is it soreness, that tissue stress from training change and that recovery debt still? So the solution here is prioritise our sleep, increase your carbs and your protein, maybe get an extra 20 to 40 grams before bed, and get that gentle movement, maybe go and have a massage. If it's lethargy, that general malaise, often this is a nutritional deficiency, so we want to get maybe some blood work done, check on what your iron levels are, your vitamin D, your hormone status. We want to look at increasing your energy intake. Low intensity training only until you've got that data to give you some answers. And this is the one that catches first-time ultra runners off guard. Post-race blues is real. It's common and it's predictable. So you don't need to feel ambushed by it. As I've already mentioned, we've got biology and behaviour. So there's two layers to this post-race low. And we need to treat both layers. And the dip is shorter and shallower if we do. So the biology, we've got our tryptophan kynurenine pathway which shifted, and as already mentioned, we see this marker inflammation and central fatigue rise post-race. Trained athletes, more experienced athletes, show more of this kynuric acid, which is a neuroprotective. So inflammation is going to drive this shift, So then again, we want our sleep, maybe omega-3s and curcumin to attenuate that inflammation. But then we've got the behaviour, the self-talk and the habit formation. 70 to 90% of athletes use self-talk. But if you use it in the second person form, such as you can do this rather than I can do this, is better for that emotional regulation than first person. And that instructional self-talk beats motivational self-talk in the recovery context. And we want to think about building this into our habits. And touching on the sort of habit formation, habits take a long time to build. So the study showing 59 to 66 days, not maybe just 21 days that you might have heard about. So this is why we're going to think about planning recovery routines for the long game, building it into the preparation before the race as well, and potentially then changing your behaviours before the race will then have an effect after the race. But those changing behaviours will take a long time. So I keep saying this, but sleep really is the highest leverage tool that you have. And we've got 3 different paths through which it restores that recovery, mood and our pain. The glymphatic, which is our slow wave sleep, expanding the interstitial space around 60%, and that then accelerates the clearance of the cytokines and metabolites in the brain. If we lose that slow wave sleep, then we get more inflammation, more pain. There's inflammatory, so even one night of partial sleep loss will shift that cytokine release patterns into the daytime. CBT for insomnia is clinically effective in 50 to 80% of patients and has an anti-inflammatory effect in its own right, so that might be useful for you. And if we think about some of the classic studies, so Milowiecki's 2014 paper showed that adolescent athletes sleeping less than 8 hours had nearly double the injury risk of those sleeping more. So sleep extension to maybe 10 hours can improve your sprint, shooting accuracy and mood. So it's been shown to really improve a wide range of factors here. When we think about the ultra races, then sleep banking before we've got that known restriction can provide a cognitive buffer. And you can see the webinars from our chronobiologist, our sleep coach, Chloe, for more on this. So just to reinforce this point, when we're looking to instill these new habits to support our race recovery, remember that these habits can take 59 to maybe 66 days to form. That's the median time for a new habit to become automatic, not 21. That 21 idea comes from a 1960s plastic surgeon's book about mirror habituation, and it's wrong. So we need to plan these recovery routines for the long game, anchor them into our existing daily cues. So build them into our sort of post-shower, pre-coffee, pre-bed, and give that reward immediately. So post-training sessions, have your chocolate milk, hot shower, then a social check-in. Wiring these habits faster. So you don't expect this new behaviour to stick at just sort of 3 weeks, 2 months minimum. So get it right before the race so that it rolls smoothly after the race. Now having just to think about some other populations, there may be 3 modifications worth making for female ultra runners. We want to think about the menstrual phase and how that modifies our HRV, rate of perceived exertion and inflammatory markers. Everyone's an individual, so track your cycle alongside your wellness data. It provides context for variable readings that otherwise might look like overtraining. From a bone perspective, remember that you achieve peak bone mass by around 19 years, but only 37% of adolescent female athletes meet the strength training guidelines versus maybe 64% of males. So long-term fracture risk is a risk. It can follow later on in life. So really, as a female athlete, strength work is non-negotiable to support your bone health, so make sure you are including it. And hopefully you've heard of the concept of RED-S, relative energy deficiency syndrome. So diet-wise, you should be targeting at least 45 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day. Warning signs to look out for are menstrual dysfunction, so missing your periods, persistent fatigue, recurrent infections. Reassess post-race if there's been significant weight loss as well. When we think about older athletes, so those of us over 40, we've got to accept that our VO2 max is declining at around about 5 to 6% per decade in active masters athletes, half the rate of sedentary peers, which is nice. Strength training preserves our aerobic capacity and enables strength gains of 9 to even 174%, depending on your baseline and depending where you start from. So again, the message here is don't drop your strength work as you get older, increase it. Protein, our leucine requirement is roughly 2.2 times that of younger adults. That anabolic resistance is needed. We want to be targeting maybe 1.2, 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. So around about 25 to 30 grams per meal, with leucine-rich sources such as dairy, eggs, meats, or black beans as another source. And then perception as well. We've got the same biology, but older athletes feel fatigue more. Borges' 2018 paper found that master cyclists showed similar objective recovery to younger athletes, but greater perceptual fatigue at 48 hours. So sleep, maybe going for a sauna, social interactions, these are interventions that target our perception and are disproportionately useful for older athletes. With new runners, so we want to think about the fact that most ultra runners aren't elite and most don't need to be. But the recovery science applies more, maybe not less, to runners newer to the sport. You need to think about where you are now. Recovery doesn't require kit you don't have. The highest leverage tools are free. Sleep, going for a gentle walk, social connections, journaling, breathing exercises. Then you can do things like cold baths if it's away from finished your A race, and then all the other sort of supplements are maybe optional. They're not foundational. Your first ultra is going to represent a much bigger relative tissue stress. You've got less training history, and that equals lower tissue resilience. So the 4-phase protocol still applies, just maybe you need to lengthen each phase by a day or two. And also get help early. So novice ultra runners plus concurrent life loads is going to equal highest value from a professional input. So don't wait until something breaks to then go and ask for help. Seek help early. And then this is the part that turns races into learning, not just experiences. Without reflection, every race just teaches the same lesson. With it, every race makes you better. So at HB3, we've got a comprehensive race evaluation form that our athletes use. But I've used this one here, adapted from Gibbs' 1988 reflective cycle, which is asking 6 questions. And this might take you perhaps 15 minutes to complete, which you can work through within the first week of finishing your race. So describe what actually happened. Pace, fuel, terrain, kit, weather, support. Just write down the facts. Then the feelings. What were your feelings at the start, in the middle, the lows, the highs, and then at the finish? Name the emotions, not just the moments. Evaluation. So then what went well and what didn't go well? Be specific. It was hard. Well, that doesn't help you next time. Then the analysis. Why did things happen? And then conclusion. What would you keep, change, or stop? And from here, you can then write your action plan. What 3 things will you change in the next training block moving forward? Don't skip the steps that feel uncomfortable, because those are the ones that are going to really teach you and help you learn. So for coaches watching this, the post-race conversation has 4 anchors with your athletes. 1, the pacing decisions. Where did the athlete decide to push, hold, or maybe back off? And what information were they working from? 2, the fueling tolerance and the gut signals. What was tolerated, what wasn't? What was attempted late and why? 3, sleep deprivation handling and mental low points. How were the night sections handled in a long ultra? When did the athlete come closest to dropping and what changed it? And then 4, what to test in the next block. So 2 or 3 specific changes, not just a wish list. tied to the athlete's own action plan from their reflection as well. So it's athlete-led. And then the last reframe, detraining is fast, but full rest for 2 weeks is rarely the answer either. So the returning week is the difference between bouncing back and digging deeper. We want to think about an active versus a passive recovery week. And Bosquet and Majuka's 2012 paper is quite useful here to show that VO2 max declines about 15% over 12 to 84 days without doing any training. So zero training has a real cost. Passive or full rest is what most athletes maybe default to, but VO2 max and aerobic endurance loss is going to accelerate. Mood often dips harder, we've got fewer endorphin doses. Tissues stay unloaded, slowing tendon adaptation, and then re-entry is harder, the comeback is heavier, and there's a real risk of habit erosion, the habits we've talked about building, and that falls apart, and there's a real risk of then tissue overload because of that detraining. What we want is active recovery, a structured recovery week, and this is what the evidence supports. 50 to 60% of normal volume, reduced intensity. So walking, easy bike, swim, mobility, and those early isometrics. This maintains your VO2 max and aerobic endurance. Mood is preserved through movement and daylight, and this creates an easier and safer re-entry into the next block of structured training. So one last thing before we wrap. Don't restart with that same intensity distribution that you peaked with for your race. Intensity distribution should vary over the course of the season. Real-world data from Muniz Palmeiras 2024 on 119,000 marathon runners found that most are pyramidal in practice. So about 49% zone 1, 35% zone 2, 16% zone 3. Not the textbook polarized model or the 80-20, and that's okay. So hopefully you're not sticking to that 80-20 concept. So for re-entry, we want to really think about that pyramidal approach and build back. So weeks 1 to 2 is mostly zone 1, perhaps a little bit of zone 2. Week 3, we might start to reintroduce some zone 3 surges. And week 4, you're going to then start to resume your block-specific structure. Monitoring in the early re-entry, we're going to be using subjective wellness, which is more sensitive than HRV alone. Sleep, mood, soreness, motivation. We want to show that the self-reported scores, these can detect the cumulative stress better than just HRV in this window. And that comes from SOAR 2015. So trust your athlete's words more than just the data that's getting pulled through. So 5 things to take home if you remember nothing else from this webinar. 1, recovery is multi-tissue. Each tissue is on its own clock, and therefore we need to program it accordingly. 2, loading is part of the treatment. Tendons, mood, sleep, pain modulation, all respond to structured load, not rest. 3, manage failure proximity, not load. Non-failure restores in 6 hours. Failure in training costs maybe 48 hours. So don't go too hard. 4, don't blunt the inflammatory signal. It's part of the adaptation. So maybe skip the routine cold water immersion and non-steroidals in those adaptation blocks. Use sleep, vitamin D and creatine instead. 5, reflection turns those races into learning. So use those 6 questions, take 15 minutes and do that within the first week. The next race depends on it. So for the runners in the room, if you want this protocol applied to your race or immediately post-race, HP3 builds these personalised post-ultra recovery plans for runners at every level, including those new to ultra and those returning after a break. We've got 3 offerings. We've got our post-ultra marathon recovery blocks on Training Peaks, 4 or 6 week structured returns, with the bike being used with either heart rate guide or power if you've got a power meter. We've also got online physiotherapy assessment and rehab, which is synchronous or asynchronous. So if you're anywhere in the world, we can help you. And we've also got one-to-one coaching plus our recovery and nutrition protocols, all found at hp-3.co.uk. For the coaches and support staff in the room, the wider HP3 community is the platform that supports you. We've got three things here. We've got the HP3 S&C library and recovery and nutrition protocols that you can use. We've got programmable templates and downloadable protocols that you can use with your own athletes. Coach mentoring and peer community. We've got case discussion support, clinical reasoning, networking. And the webinar pack itself, these slides and the reference list and the runner worksheets, all available to download. So you can borrow our framework, the evidence is on the reference sheet, and the application is in this conversation that we've had. So that's everything for today. If you race long, then this is the work that's going to protect everything that you've worked hard to achieve. If you've got any questions, please speak to your coach, or you can post on the Circle community for a general conversation. Thanks very much for your time.